Let's begin the practice day with a little setting of motivation, quieting our mind, to sit comfortably. First of all, we'll do the quintessential meditation that the Buddha is reported to have done in the beginning of many of the sutras, the mindfulness on the breathing, placing his mindfulness on the breath in front of him. So let's ourselves do that, just as the Buddha did. It's not a simple minded meditation. It's a device to concentrate your mind on one thing and let all the other thoughts, discursive thoughts, just not be attended to, so they'll diminish. And then when your mind is somewhat calmed, bring your attention further inside and focus on the more subtle object of the nature of your mental consciousness. As though withdrawing your attention like a tortoise pulls in its legs and head into the shell. So away from your 5 senses, draw your attention to the heart chakra. And as a starting point, you may have a remembering consciousness of this clear light nature that you begin to perceive through investigating the mind, not just an imagination of just a clear space, but actual experience of its unobstructing nature. You can start from there, or again observe the flow of thoughts in the mind, try to sense a space between them. Focus on that. Or recognizing, even when the thoughts are present, that in itself, the flow of thoughts, their fluidity, infers the non-obstructive nature of the mind. By focusing on that, let go of the other thoughts. Remind yourself to let go again and again. Let go of the sense of your body. The inner distracting thoughts. Although our mind, the nature of our mind, has this clear, calm nature, because of our karma, different things appearing, because, again, of our habituation to inappropriate ways of thinking about what happens to us. Our mind loses that clarity, gets disturbed with the emotions, the klesha, the disturbing emotional thoughts. All sentient beings are the same way. We don't have to respond to the appearances that occur to our mind. We don't have to respond in the way that we do now. The ordinary samsaric mind would respond with fear or envy, puffed up mind, some pride, incredible thirst, lust, attachment to things that we perceive because they appear to our mind, ideas, possibility of relationships, possession, fame, wealth, and so forth. And of course, angered repulsion, responding to appearances, and also the appearances of pleasure or suffering. When our mind is chaotic, we can always go back to this clear light nature, remember impermanence, that we don't have to respond to the events of our life that are appearing in the way that we do now. Let our mind calm down so that we can respond with a Dharma method, Dharma wisdom. Remember that all living beings over the course of time have been just as close as our closest companion now. Maybe closer. And some of us may be introverted and we have few friends, but in other lifetimes we've completely been dependent on our parents, our friends, our brothers, our sisters, our other relatives, our dearest companions and friends. And if we think about it, even now, if we don't sense a lot of closeness, all living beings are kind to us even now. One stranger, providing the infrastructure for our world, for our ability to have our own little place of habitation, our job, to receive some compensation, is due to the kindness of sentient beings. But much more so, they're the objects of my practice of the Bodhisattva's perfections. Without sentient beings, I can't practice generosity. I can't fulfill the perfection of generosity. I could still make offerings to the Buddhas, but not to fulfill and wish to fulfill the needs of all sentient beings. Without sentient beings, there's no way to keep moral discipline, because it's with respect to sentient beings that I fulfill that also. To look at sentient beings in a different way, rather than as problems, as irritations, as objects of my patience, in a positive sense, not thinking, oh, they're objects of my patience in a negative sense, that they're always irritating me, but in a positive way. This is giving me a chance to work on my patience, which has, like a chronic disease, been infiltrated into my mind, infused into my mind since beginningless time. So to even relish situations where my irritation might be provoked. Sentient beings are my object of observation of the perfection of energy, perseverance, enthusiasm. To ripen their minds, whatever time it takes. Even if now the help I try to give, the love or instruction or direction I try to give them, does not seem to be appropriate because I lack skill and means, to make plans, to pray in the future. I will ripen their minds to lead them on the path. Imagine that sequentially, that they develop renunciation, perhaps even more than we have now, but we can imagine that they develop loving compassion and the selfless wish to benefit sentient beings, to attain enlightenment for their benefit, and that they can practice the Tantra path perfectly, perfect observance of relying on the Guru, practicing continuously, attaining enlightenment. In that way, they're the objects of my practice of perseverance. Also concentration. They're the objects of my concentration to develop bodhicitta. Mindful, instead of on the 4 close placements of mindfulness, mindful of the bodhisattva motive all the time with respect to sentient beings. As Shantideva says in the Bodhisattvacharya Vatara, in the chapter on concentration, main object there of concentration is for the development of bodhicitta. And also in the 37 practices, in the Confession Sutra of the 35 Buddhas, when one is dedicating the merits from the perfection of concentration, one dedicates the merits of developing the supreme precious mind of enlightenment. Sentient beings are kind in being my objects of perfection of wisdom that pervades all the first 5 perfections, should be conjoined with them. Sentient beings are kind even when they're appearing as my antagonist, my enemy, when they push my buttons, because they give me a chance to practice, to purify my negative karma now, much more quickly, rather than in an uncontrolled fashion, being born in the lower realms. Now, by experiencing some sadness, some defeat, some loss, some irritation, something being deprived of me, stolen, sentient beings are providing the causes for me to purify, to exhaust my collection of negative karma. As the verse in the Guru Puja, Lama Chopa, when the world, like now, and its inhabitants are filled with the results of our past negative deeds, an undesired suffering falls like a shower of rain. All the irritation we have, all the worldly political strife, the wars in the world, the criticisms we constantly hear, the unease, even in our own life. When in a situation like that, please grant me blessings to transform these otherwise adverse conditions, transform them into a path that leads to spiritual development instead of being depressed by them. By seeing that situation, otherwise experienced as unpleasant, as the exhausting of my negative karma. So to be happy about that, like paying off a debt. This is finished. think also in your own life if there are moments of kindness that you experience toward others, wanting them to be happy, wishing that they would overcome their problems. All sentient beings have felt the same about us numberless times in a much more intense way, even willing to give their life for us. Not recognizing their intimate relationship with us. They've all been our mother numberless times. We don't sense a closeness. But if we start to open up that avenue of investigation, start to recognize that they've all been our mother numberless times, it's just a matter of time compared to our present mother. They've all been just as kind, depthlessly kind, as our present mother. Wanting to repay that kindness, recognizing I could become a doctor, I could become many kinds of helpers in the world. In fact, that's what bodhisattvas generally try to do. But if I put all of my attention on that alone, I'd never be able to pay back the kindness of sentient beings. From a Mahayana perspective, the way to repay the kindness of sentient beings is not simply to repay it now, or to attain the lesser goal of nirvana by eliminating myself from the objects of observation of attachment and hatred in the world, becoming an arhat, attaining nirvana. That's not sufficient. I should find a way to lead sentient beings, as is possible, into nirvana, into enlightenment. To do so, I'm not yet equipped. I need to develop the actual experience of the path to become a Buddha myself, to have the perfect skill, wisdom, even though I can inspire others, some as a teacher, or as just a spiritual friend, companion. To really lead them, I have to make these realizations. I have to have the skill, the clairvoyance, the knowledge, the wisdom to know the results of actions. So for that purpose, I have to attain enlightenment, practice the bodhisattva deeds. If Tantra is existing in the world as it is now, to practice that, to make a karmic connection with that, to quickly attain enlightenment. So for that purpose, to attain enlightenment for the sentient beings, for the sake of sentient beings, I'm going to participate today in the practice day on the 4 schools of Tenets, to understand their method and wisdom, so that I can get closer to the goal of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then bring your attention back, present. So, Does anyone have any questions about the course that we've finished? Actually, those who are watching on video will say, George looks a little bit older than the last class. It's a couple months after our last class. And we have our practice day. Don, you have some question? You get your pen. Oh, okay. I thought you were turning to a page of questions. Are you just writing down? So we've Venerable. Do you have some question? You're biting your fingernails.
Probably more questions.
Right, you got some wee questions.
I'll have probably more questions as the day goes on.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything.
Okay. Carrie, you're okay? Okay. So, we've been studying, as is presented in the Tibetan tradition, 4 schools of tenets. Sometimes you might say, some scholars might say, that's kind of a Tibetan invention. I think it's not something that's completely Tibetan. It was studied by the Indian scholars in the era before the spread of Buddhism to Tibet. Most of Tibetan Buddhism, and much of it, can be traced to Indian Buddhism. So it's not like just a Tibetan invention. Even guru devotion. Sometimes people call. You know what the Western first investigators that went to Tibet, they called Tibetan Buddhism? Do you know, Georgie? Lamaism. What? Because there was this seemingly, extreme devotion to the guru, the Lama. Everything was the Lama. Even when we take refuge to the Lama first, Lama La Kapsuchi, then to Buddha Dharma. So it's sort of like they thought it was an aberration, some kind of distortion of Buddha's teachings, but it's very much the emphasis of a path like the Lan Rim, in which you're not only practicing something common to the lower scopes, but something exclusive to the highest scope. In this case, exclusive especially to Tantra, that kind of practice of guru devotion. Prepare our mind for that. So we've talked about the 4 schools. Let me say, what are the 4 schools, Venerable? Do you know the 4 schools, the Tibetan Buddhists?
I can't say it properly. Vaibhashika.
That's quite good. How do you say that in Tibetan? Do you know? It might be worth good. We said it in Sanskrit a lot, but do you know how the Tibetans say? Oh, we should know. Dorji, do you know? Chetak Mawa. Chetak in Tibetan means individual, particular. Chi and Chetak means generality and particular. Chi means generality and Chetak means particular or particularity. The Chetak Mawa. Mawa is, we've had before, like when we say Masam Jome, Ma means to propound or to say or to utter. So those who talk about particulars, Chetamawa, those are the Vaibhashikas. So that's one. And then above that, what is there, Venerable? Is it?
Swatrantika.
Swatantrika, is that right? You could hear a swa at the beginning. Is that right, Carrie?
Swatantrika.
Sau, S-A-U, Sautrantika. Not swa, that comes later. The swa or swa comes later. This is sau, like sutra, in one of its grammatical variations in Sanskrit. S-A-U-T-R-A, Sautrantika. Those are in Tibetan, did anyone know in Tibetan? Do depa. Do means sutra. Dode means sutra sets. Those who are of the sutra sets. So the Sautrantikas, remember why they're called Sautrantikas? Any reason why they're called Sautrantikas? Oh, so the other schools don't follow sutra, right? Omadina?
You're giving her a better time.
Listen, I'm going to give the guys a worse time, so just...
Examples in their teachings.
That's one in one of the etymology. One of the other names of the Sautrantikas has a meaning like that they use examples, but that's not the etymology of Sautrantika. Do you remember, Carrie?
Well, basically external objects. Then no. And they do a lot of twos.
A lot of twos. Toes or twos? Twos. Anyone have an idea why they're called Sautrantikas? We've mentioned before on several occasions. I think one of the reasons, there may be other reasons. One of the reasons is that unlike the Vaibhashikas, they don't accept all of the Abhidharma Pitaka, the 7 texts of the Abhidharma that the Vaibhashikas accept as actual word of Buddha. They think that's kind of those texts that are enshrined in the Vaibhashika canon, and the Sautrantikas have also, they don't say that those are actually the word of Buddha, because there's some mistakes in there. They think they were written by various saints, but not perfected. And they say that the Buddha did teach the Abhidharma. He said he taught the Abhidharma, but it can be found in the sutras. You have to look within the sutra to find passages that talk about higher wisdom. And so that's one reason they're called Sautrantika. You can check in the text other reasons. Okay, so those are the Dodepa. Dode in Tibetan means sutra sets. Then, let's see, Mark, what do you think? Do you know the first of the Mahayana schools? What are they called?
Chittamatra?
Chittamatra. Do you know what that is in Tibetan?
I know I did.
You know you did. Okay, that's at least you know something. You know you did not. That's called the Sem Sampa. Sam means only or mere. Sem is chitta. Remember from our mind and mental factors, chitta. So Sem Sampa. Chitta matra. It's not mantra, right? Matra, M-A-T-R-A, means mere or only. So what's the etymology of that? Why are they called Chittamatra?
Oh, mind only.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I can always answer when you're not calling on me.
Not saying anything.
Yeah? Your mind is a blank when they're called mind only because that's what my college professor.
Expressions of the mind, there is no.
Okay, so then you need a little refresher course in Tenets here. Dorji, do you know why they're called mind only? Oh my gosh, this is like fundamental. Come on. Talk about the subtleties. This is you have to know why they're called Chittamatra.
Was it because, I probably have this incorrect, but they don't hold, they hold a tenet that all phenomena are of mind, or that there is the emptiness of the difference between the mind and the object ascertained. Oh,
It sounds like calculus. The difference between the
yeah, there's an emptiness. The emptiness is of a separation between the object and the mind ascertaining it. Is it something like that?
It's something like that. Yeah, it's something like that. Well, why would we say mind only? They say that there's no external world existing the way that it appears to us. That all of the outer phenomena are of the nature of the mind. There is merely mind. All, like Buddha said in some of the sutras, the 3 worlds are chittamatra, are mere mind. They take that. And of course, the higher Mahayana schools say that was not the intention of Buddha. Buddha had an ulterior motive for saying that, for some disciples, maybe he said in some other places, he talked about that external phenomena didn't exist. But in terms of that, if you talk about Chittamatra, what are some of the other names? Do you remember the other synonyms of Chittamatra? Vijnaptamavadin. Vijnapti means what? Yogacara. Yogacara practitioners. Also Vijnapti Vadin, and what's another one? I forgot. Is it? No. It's not right. What was it? As I say. Oh, there's another one like Vijnaptamani Vadin. No, those are subsets of the Chittamatra. Oh, Vijnana Vadin and Vijnapti Vadin. Both of them are like different variations of the word, talking about consciousness. So, when in that respect, Dorje, what you were saying is right. Like, for instance, if all phenomena are really of the nature of the mind, although they appear to be really external, from this first of the Mahayana schools, there's also an emptiness of phenomena, not just a selflessness of persons. Although phenomena, most phenomena truly exist, or such as objects truly exist, they don't exist as they appear as being external. They are empty of that kind of reality. The form, let's say if we're talking about visual form and the form realizing consciousness are empty of being what?
Separate entities?
Separate entities, different substances, right? So that's kind of where now the word emptiness starts to take on a more universal aspect than in the Hinayana schools. The Hinayana schools don't talk about emptiness so much. They talk about empty as one of the aspects of the Four Noble Truths, but shunyata, they talk about shunya. Shunya means empty, right? Shunyata means emptiness. Okay? Like we say tongba in Tibetan means empty. Tongba ni means emptiness. So there's a difference. Something the lower schools talk about, as we'll be meditating in a little while. One of the four aspects of the Four Noble Truths is that, the aspect of suffering. One of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth, the truth of suffering, has four aspects. Do you remember, Diana? We went over the other night. Impermanent, suffering,
Selfless.
empty, and selfless. Right? So that empty is not emptiness. It's talking from the lower school's point of view. It's that phenomena are empty of being partless. Say, for instance, one of the misconceptions of the person, the grossest misconception of the person for the Vaibhashikas. Frank, do you remember? When we talk about, there are two kinds of selflessness of persons for the Vaibhashika, a gross and subtle. If I were to tell you, if I were to remind you that the subtle selflessness of persons for the Vaibhashikas is that the person is empty of being self-supporting and substantially existent, is not self-supporting, substantially existent, what's the gross selflessness of person?
I believe it's permanent, partless, and something else.
And something else. Independent. Right. So that partless, the sense that we have a partless kind of self, whereas actually the self is imputed onto a set of aggregates, parts. So that's kind of the taste of shunya when it's mentioned as one of the aspects of the Four Noble Truths. It's not so much here in the Mahayana. When we talk about Chittamatra, we start talking about a universal nature of emptiness. All phenomena are empty in this sense as objects of the mind. Well, let's say external phenomena. Also, there's a subtler meaning. There's another interpretation of emptiness for the Chittamatra, which, according to Asanga, can be equated with that. although it's expressed verbally in a very different fashion. Do you remember what that is? Anyone? What's the...
The name is not inherent in the form or something?
Right, so how would one express that verbally? Do you have any, maybe you have in your note, you want to recall? One of the ways of expressing emptiness was that form and form realizing consciousness were empty of being different substances. It didn't have to be form. It could be feeling, apprehending, or any of the five aggregates, or even, anything that seemed to be an external phenomena. Doji, do you remember?
Sorry, I was spacing out. What was the
Oh, okay.
question?
I was spacing out, so I can't remember the question.
And emptiness that is the form as form apprehending valid cognizes emptiness of being other substances, and second one, an emptiness that is the form's emptiness of existing by way of its own characteristics is a base for assigning the term form.
So, right. So that's the one. Does that make any sense to you? That a form, let's say, that you give a name to, vase, let's say, or let's say Mark, is empty of existing inherently, or what does it say? Truly? What does it say? Inherently? Ultimately? From this case, ultimately, because when you talk about other things, as being the basis for the name Mark,
By way of its own characteristic.
by way of its own characteristic. So that means that names don't, from the Chittamatra point of view, don't adhere. There's no basis in the object. There's no sort of nature that can be found there which is inherent in that object that is a basis for that name. Now you could argue, the Chittamatrans argue that the Sautrantikas don't accept that, almost as though names do adhere in objects. But I think they wouldn't. You could force them into saying that, but this is the Chittamatra position. This is like a subtle kind of understanding of emptiness. And if I recall, I mentioned before that Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned in one of his texts, I believe, His Holiness has mentioned, that on the basis of that Chittamatra understanding of emptiness, even though that's not the Madhyamaka view of emptiness, nor even the Prasangika Madhyamaka view of emptiness, on the basis of that, you could attain some of the high tantric realizations. You can't attain enlightenment through the tantric path through that. You'd still need to have the correct view. How far could you go with that view? Do you know? Of the 5 stages of Tantra? Could you attain clear light? The stage of clear light? That would be what's clear light called? That would be is that example clear light? Realizing example clear light or meaning clear light? That would be like realizing the meaning clear light. What comes before that? This is not exactly in a tenets class, but just in case some of you have studied before. Illusory body, right? So the illusory body comes first when you attain the impure illusory body. So it's possible to attain, I believe, from Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings, it's possible to attain the impure illusory body, which is a third of the 5 stages of the completion stage, on the basis of this subtle Chittamatra view. So it's not something to be scoffed at. Like scholars would say, oh, it's wrong, or it's right, whatever. From the skillful, teachings of the Buddha, it does have a great meaning, and among other things, it can be one can attain very high levels of practice. But from the viewpoint of the higher teachings, it itself is not yet the correct view of emptiness. So, what does Madhyamaka mean? Who didn't I call on yet? Did I call on Frank? Frank, you remember what Madhyamaka means? Say the name of the school. And someone who practices that Majjhimika,
Middle way.
the middle way, so you could say that, and a Majjhimika is a middle wayer, maybe something like that. Someone who practices the middle way. What? Practitioner of the middle way. So they're the only ones that propound the middle way. Done? The Majjhimika? Other schools don't propound the middle way. They say it's my way or the highway or what. My aunt in Chicago, I learned that from her. She used to work in a cafeteria, so she knew all the teenage kind of things. Do you say that? Or is that only like kids say that? Or you say that to kids?
30 years ago.
That's 30 years, okay. That's it's my way or the highway.
I think that other schools sometimes claim the middle way, but the Majjhimika would dispute it.
Yeah, I think all the schools, the Buddha taught that he was teaching the middle way. So all the schools would say that their presentation is a middle way. But so the name kind of might sound strange, but the middle way here is talking about what is the middle way? Carrie, do you know? It's a middle way. There has to be a middle way between. We could say what?
Extremes.
Two extremes, right? That's good. It helps, huh? So what are the two extremes that are?
I think the mind-only school, visualizing that it's all inherently empty except for what's internal, and then the other extreme would be that it's all real and external.
So it's called the middle way because only in comparison to the other tenets?
That was my take on it.
That was your take, okay. Oma, do you have a feeling about that?
It's the middle way between nihilism and externalism, extremism, something, anyway.
Yeah, that's perhaps more.
The idea that nothing exists, or that everything exists, and the whole idea that it's somewhere in between, that it does exist, but just it's a misapprehension and it doesn't exist the way we think it does.
So those would be extremes, that nothing exists or that everything exists. So if we want to find the middle way, so there's some views that are closer to the middle way, but still not the middle way, right? So say amongst the Majjhimikas, there were two major schools that the Tibetans recognized, right? Now we'll give you a chance, Venerable. What are the names of those two schools?
The Prasangika